Like if you really think about building a business, yeah, vision's important, recruiting's important, the ability to fundraise is important. The idea is actually, somewhat important in terms of like you got to make the right decisions about what markets to go after, all that kind of stuff. But if you're a problem solver and you have critical thinking skills, you can think from first principles. You're an independent thinker. You are going to get all those other decisions right. Right. And so like a good founder rarely goes after a bad market. Right now, they may make mistakes, they may do these things, but like the decision-making framework that they use will normally get them into the right markets. It'll get them good people around them. It'll get them capital, and then it'll get kind of out in front of customers. And so things can go wrong, but really what you're trying to figure out is just, can this person make decisions with a lack of information in an uncertain environment? And do they have a propensity to solve problems? And so the way I always talk about it is like, when something comes up, there's two types of people. If all of a sudden you get an email and that email has an issue, there's people who read the email, don't answer it, and then they wait 2 days and then they try to go answer it later. And like, they're very much in the defensive mode. And then there's people who they get an email and there's a problem and they immediately pick up the phone and they call the person and say, hey, how do we solve this? Those two people are very, very different. And I think you always want that the second person, the person who will call and kind of be offensive in nature, because what it does is it really allows you to take something that is frankly valueless in the beginning. It's usually an idea with one or two people and create something that's massive because they just solve every problem along the way so that they kind of earn the right to continue the journey. I've been fortunate over the last 3 or 4 years to build some pretty large audiences, and it's kind of grown into a pretty attractive business in itself. But what I started to understand and was lucky enough to have a number of people way smarter than me kind of talk me through was, look, there's going to be a point, and starting now, but it'll get more popular over time, where founders, they're not going to want to take money from the institutions. They want individuals, right? The individual actually can bring more value and can bring a greater brand awareness than an institution. Now, that doesn't mean that all the institutions go away, right? In venture capital, for example, Benchmark, Sequoia, Andreessen, those guys are absolute tier one, best of the best, world-class investors, and those institutions will persist. But what happens to all of the tier two and tier three investors is, if a founder is faced at a pre-seed or seed level with taking money from an individual with a very large audience that can bring awareness, signal, and value versus take it from an institution, more and more these founders are deciding, I want to take it from the individual rather than the institution. I think Bitcoin's going to be the next global reserve currency. And I think that every single person that's listening to this, every single person in the industry is completely underestimating this thing. I believe that Bitcoin is not only the hardest, soundest money we've ever seen in the world, but I think that it is the absolute apex predator in financial markets. And the reason why I think that is because there is one key trend that most people in finance don't understand. And it is the superiority of digital assets or digital products over analog products and assets. And so the technology industry is better suited to understand this component, which is, if you look at store value and medium of exchange assets, historically, those have been analog. And then they basically became these electronic QSIP assets, which was just a kind of slight improvement on the analog version. So there was still middlemen, there was still a lot of bureaucracy, there was a lot of kind of human interaction, right? When you send a wire, in many cases, there's humans involved in that process. So it's not a truly digital process. The digital product is not only superior to the analog or electronic products, but it is also never, I literally cannot think of a single example where a digital asset is smaller than the analog equivalent. And so I always let's go to Bitcoin and gold. We'll start there. Gold has served as a store of value for 5,000 years. It's done a fantastic job of what it's supposed to do. It is not scarce. And the reason why I say that is because people claim gold is scarce, but it's a narrative. Gold has a scarce narrative. And we used to live in a narrative-driven world. That narrative-driven world would be somebody told you a story, and that story was believed because somebody else told them that. And enough people started saying it that they all started to believe it. But just because a narrative exists does not mean that it is true. And the reason why you cannot say that gold is scarce is because you cannot prove it. You may think it could be scarce, You may have data that suggests that it is not as easy to find as other assets, but you cannot prove how much gold is available. What you can show is, here's how much we've dug out in a certain time frame. But even to the point where I say, tell me how much gold is in the circulating supply. Nobody can prove it. People can guess, they can get close, but nobody can prove it. And so that narrative-driven world we used to live in got disrupted by the internet. The internet said we are going to drastically increase your access to information, and we are going to switch from a narrative-driven world to a provable world. You have to prove things now. You can't just rely on the narrative.
Yeah, that doesn't work. That's not true, right? I mean, just seeing what's going on in social media, we're still narrative-driven.
But that's why social media is breaking, is because the internet is able to show the narratives that we're told on social media from the existing institutions, politicians, etc., is a narrative. It's not true. I can prove that you are wrong, but you can't prove two separate things. If you make a single statement, gold is scarce, and I say, prove it, you can't. If I say to you, Bitcoin is scarce, and you say, prove it, I can show you there are 21 million Bitcoin. I can show you the exact number in the circulating supply. I can show you the exact daily incoming supply. And if I say, great, this is Bitcoin, show me gold's equivalent. Nobody can do it. You have to put an asterisk next to every number and say it's estimated. Now, this is important, and this really, really upsets kind of the legacy finance folks, and it upsets the gold bug community. But the reason why it's so important is gold is a narrative and Bitcoin is provable. And the difference between those two things has nothing to do with the legacy world. The players of the legacy world, they think that the narrative has value. Their entire careers have been built on this. The next generation doesn't believe the narrative. The next generation says, prove it, and you can't with the legacy assets. It's important to understand gold's kind of rise to prominence in the modern world. So gold served as kind of money and exchange of value for a very, very long time. Hard to carry around, hard to divide, hard to just eyeball, how much gold is that? And so eventually we said, hey, look, instead of carrying this gold around, why don't we just leave it in a vault or in the bank, and we'll carry around paper claims on the gold. And I'll say, hey, if you sell me that horse, I'll give you my paper claims on the gold. You can go to the bank and you can turn in the paper claim and they'll give you the actual gold. And so that made commerce easier, right? The technology of the claim on the gold actually increased the velocity of money and the ease of use or the exchange of value. After we did that, we eventually then created this electronic QSIP system. We created credit. We built all these layers on top of gold as that kind of layer one technology. Now, in 1971, we decided we're going to unpeg gold from the paper claims, and kind of all this stuff, went to the wayside. But that structure of layer one, layer two, layer three is really important. Because that's what's happening in Bitcoin today. Is layer one is optimizing for security and store of value. It's exactly what gold did. It didn't optimize for the fastest transactions or the easiest of use. It optimized for security and store of value. If you held the asset, you knew it was secure and you knew it would store value because of that scarcity narrative.